Hello there, and welcome to the next lesson in our series on green laws. Today we're going to discuss two laws under this lesson, lesson 3. These two laws focus on mining. They are essentially the Philippine Mining Act of 1995, or Republic Act number 7942, and the People's Small Scale Mining Act, or Republic Act number 7076. These two laws are essentially the primary governing laws on mining activities in the Philippines. They are also credited for operationalizing the constitutional principle under Section 2, Article 12 of the Constitution on the ownership of the state of all natural resources that are found within the Philippines and their correlated right to their use, development, and utilization. Let's take a stab at getting to know what these laws are all about. Let's start with the first law. That's the Philippine Mining Act of 1995. And basically what we're going to do here is the same method that we have been doing in the last few laws, where we look at the top portion of the law and just seeing what's there insofar as the full title of the law, as well as if there are any whereas clauses, what's in them, and also the declaration of policy. So that's exactly what we're going to do here in order to help us answer what this law is all about. All right. So we are able to see from the actual title, the full title, essentially what this law is intending to do, which is to institute a new system of mineral resources exploration, development, utilization, and conservation. The declaration of policy also provides some basis behind that. I will not read it here, but let me just go ahead and just take what I've captured here and put it in a format that is easy for me to understand, or at least to quickly grasp. Okay, so based on what we're seeing on the full title as well as the declaration of policy, this is what we come up with. The Philippine Mining Act is really about a new system of mineral resources exploration, development, utilization, and conservation. Okay, and it is involving a couple of things, namely the combined efforts of government and the private sector. And it also aims to enhance national growth while effectively safeguarding the environment and protect the rights of affected communities. So this last sentence on its aim actually, in a way, is also presenting a counterbalance. Because based on what we've discussed to date on environmental laws that we have previously talked about, that there is an ongoing balance between the protection of these valuable resources and the utilization thereof. So this is also falling in the same framework, where there is some discussions about its aim to enhance national growth, but at the same time looking to effectively safeguard the environment as well as to protect the rights of affected community. So there, you have that counterbalance there. A couple of other things to keep in mind. Okay, as to the scope of application, this law, the Philippine Mining Act, it governs the exploration, development, utilization, and process of all minerals. That's what it says on the law itself. Okay, so it's talking about the exploration, the development, utilization, and the process of all minerals, that it governs all of that. Okay, but there is exception. That's the general rule. So it's almost all-encompassing, no? But there is an exception, and that exception really is small-scale mining. And that is governed by RA 7079, which is the next law that we're going to talk about. A second thing to keep in mind is who is the agency that is primarily primarily responsible for the supervision of the provisions of this law. Okay, and the law provides that the DENR as well as the MGD being the Mines and Geosciences Bureau, that's a line bureau of the DNR. Okay, they're the two that have the control and supervision authority over the provisions of this law. Okay, and again, that's also defined in the law itself. Okay, let's move forward. Let us now talk about the next law, which is the People's Small Scale Mining Act of 1991. And again, we're trying to get an understanding of what this law is about. And we're going to look again at the first part of the law, looking at the full title as well as the declaration of policy. And we're seeing that the title itself also provides what the purpose is of this law, which is to create a small-scale mining program. Okay, and the declaration of policy provides some basis in support of that, and I will not read them here, but like I did the last law, I'm just going to extrapolate from what I have captured here and put it in something that I personally can easily understand. Okay, so answering the question as to what this law is all about, the People's Small Scale Mining Act is about a program for viable small-scale mining activities in order to generate more employment opportunities and provide equitable sharing of the nation's wealth and natural resources. Now, there is also a counterbalance here because these two things that I've checked marked are speaking to the utilization of those resources. So the counterbalance is on giving due regard to existing rights. Okay, it's not necessarily the protection of the resources themselves, but in this case, rights of people that might be affected in the in providing those two benefits that I've checked marked. Okay. Now there are also a couple of notes to keep in mind about the People's Small Scale Mining Act. The first is, understanding exactly what the definition is, according to law, of what small-scale mining is. And the law says that it is mining activities which rely heavily on manual labor, using simple implement and methods, and do not use explosives or have mining equipment. Okay, and that's a misspelling there, so please disregard that. So essentially, kung hindi siya if it's just involving small equipment, usually it's equipment that's used for manual labor and small scale mining, and pretty much all others based on what we read about kanina about the large scale mining or the Philippine Mining Act. Those are all under the scope of application of the Philippine Mining Act. Okay. Otherwise, again, if the mining activity involves, simple implements that are, employed manually, through manual labor, then it falls within the definition under this law of small-scale mining. Okay, it's also of noteworthy mention that the scope of small-scale mining is also defined in the law under Section 5 of this law, as well as the implementing rules and regulation. It says there that no small-scale mining shall be undertaken outside a minahang bayan. Okay, and that same IRR defines what minahang bayan is. And minahang bayan basically refers to the entire area declared as people's small-scale mining area. So it's an area that has to first be declared. So really, there is no small-scale mining that could be taken or undertaken unless unless there is a declaration or a declared minahang bayan, and only in that area could small-scale mining could be undertaken. Okay. The second note that should be kept in mind is consistent with the same types of notes that we raised with the Philippine Mining Act, and that is understanding kung sino yung nag-oversee, who has supervisory control over the provisions of this law. Okay, and this note is also in the law, and it really talks about the DNR as the primary lead in supervising the provisions of this law, and in coordination with, because they also have jurisdiction of their own, the local government units. And it's not just the local government themselves, but through the special regulatory boards that are set up in those provincial or city mining or city, province or city. Okay. All right. So let's move on. Okay, so at this point, it looks like we are ready to move on and take a look at the features of this law to help us answer the question of how this law provides. Okay, let's start with the Philippine Mining Act. The Philippine Mining Act of 1995 provides through essentially the system that it instituted, that new system of mineral resources, exploration, development, utilization, and conservation. Okay, so it's providing through that. Okay. In addition, it is the law is actually designed to revive the mining industry, and it does that through a number of features that we find on this law, and those features are as follows. Okay, it allows for foreign participation. Before this law was passed, there were some limits, if even any, that would allow foreign countries to participate in the mining industry in the Philippines. So, at the effectivity of this law, foreign countries as well as foreign nationals were able to begin participating in the mining industry in the Philippines. Okay, in two ways. The first one is specifically mining operations through what they call mining agreements. So in this law, if you do a search on the provisions of this law, you'll find a particular section that has a number of a particular chapter with the number of sections that talks about mining agreements. In fact, there are four different types that it mentions. Okay, and these again are actual agreements that pretty much cover the whole mining operations. They're not piecemeal, although the law does have a provision on permits, where it allows for permits for particular activities, like a permit for exploration and exploration only, a permit for quarrying and for quarrying only, permit for transporting, and that's pretty much it. So it has provisions that allow for permits, but different from that and specific to foreign participants, the mining agreements provide for an arrangement between the Philippine government and a contractor. Okay, that could be a corporation, a foreign corporation. Okay, where that contractor would provide a full-blown mining operation service for the Philippine government. Okay, so as I said, there's three types of those. Now, in addition to that, there is also what they call an FTAA, which provides for the second means by which foreign participants could be involved in the mining industry in the Philippines. So this FTAA, which stands for Financial or Technical Assistance Agreements, okay, allows for foreign nationals or country or corporations to actually own up to 100% in mining projects. Okay, not the actual resources, because the Constitution of the Philippines still prevents foreign ownership. The Philippines still subscribes to the idea that the natural resources are owned by the state. It's following what they call the Regalian Doctrine. Okay, that pretty much the lands of public domain are owned by the state. They're not alienable, etc., etc. The same one, if you recall, we talked about when we were talking about forest lands. Okay, so anyway, this FTAA would appear to challenge that, but in essence, it's not the same, and that's why it is allowed. In fact, there was this went all the way up to the Supreme Court. There was a case where this entire law was actually challenged. It almost actually became, at least this provision on FTA, almost became unconstitutional because when it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, it was first concluded to be unconstitutional. But the funny thing is, a year later, there was an MR, a motion for reconsideration. That a year later, the Supreme Court changed its mind. It's changed their decision because again, the challenge here was whether FTAA, the foreign, or rather the financial or technical assistance agreements, which allowed for 100% ownership by foreign countries, whether that ownership refers to the natural resources, which, as the Constitution provides, is owned by the state, okay, or whether it does not refer to that. At first, the Supreme Court said it did, and that's why they made it unconstitutional. But later on, they concluded that it's not, because you're not owning the actual resources. These foreign nationals are not owning the actual resources, but rather the service or the project, the mining project. Okay, so that's why the Supreme Court decided as they did, and so far as ruling on its constitutionality. Okay, so anyway, those are the two ways that there could be foreign participation in mining activities under this law. Okay, what are the other features? There's a few more. Actually, there's a lot because this is a very robust law. Dami-daming features. You could spend a number of hours, if not days, just going over the provisions. Anyway, what I have here are just a number that are worthwhile considering. Okay, so let's move on. What else do we have? There's a provision for incentives to encourage mining. So there's like tax benefits, some moratorium on taxes. Where you're able to defer taxes. They call it a tax holiday. So things like that. A whole bunch of incentives, and the whole idea is to encourage those in the industry to actually mine. So it's attempting to kind of stimulate the industry. So that's one interesting feature that it has. Okay, what else do we have? It has a feature that provides protection for national interests. Okay, with mining benefit sharing. Okay, with government through the NPSA. So what this means basically is that the proceeds, yung kikitahin ng mga miners, whether foreign nationals, foreign corporations, or Filipino citizens, whatever they're able to obtain from the earth, may balato ang Philippine government, okay, and it's specifically for the protection of national interests. So that's an interesting feature that exists here, and it's through an agreement that they call the Mineral Production Sharing Agreement. It's a very interesting feature. It's new. In other words, it's not new because this law has been around since 1995, but it's new in a sense that it was introduced by this law. It didn't exist before. Okay. All right. So let's move on. What else is there? Okay. There's a few more. Okay. This law also provides for the strengthening of the local government unit. Okay. In mineral resource management, not only as participants but also as beneficiaries. So that's an interesting development under this law. It makes it so the local government plays a role, okay, not just as participants but as beneficiaries. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Okay, this is a good one. It's the full recognition of the rights of indigenous people and cultural communities. You might recall when we were looking at the declaration of policy, when we were trying to determine what this law is all about, we talked a little bit about what I referred to as counterbalance, right? Kasi the law does provide, at least specifically this to mining especially, it provides some measures to allow people to use those resources, so utilization of those resources. And there's a need to, of course, counterbalance. Okay, if you recall on the forestry laws, the counterbalance there was on protection versus utilization. Ito naman, there is the benefits that could be gained, the utilization, the benefits that can be gained through the utilization of these resources, and the counterbalance is on ensuring that the rights, vested rights, given rights are not affected. You might recall that in our earlier discussion. So this is where we're finding it implemented. Okay, full recognition of the rights of indigenous people and cultural communities. So if there, said many times, these IP, indigenous people and cultural communities are residing in areas that may be rich in minerals, and so they can't just basically miners can't just go there and begin to do their mining activities. Okay? There has to be not only full recognition but full respect for the rights of the IP and the cultural communities that are in that area. Okay, what else is there? Okay, this is an interesting one. The law provides some measure so that there is preference for Filipino citizens in many areas, including mining. Okay, mining employment. Okay, there's a preference that contractors, whether foreign or not, that when they're looking to hire, that their first preference should be Filipino citizens. So this is not limited to employment. There are other mining-related opportunities that the law provides. Now let's take a look and see what features there are in the People's Small-Scale Mining Act. Okay, so the question, of course, that we're asking is how the law provides. Okay, so the People's Small-Scale Mining Act provides through also the system that it created, that new system of mineral resources exploration, development, utilization, and conservation that it created. And these are the features that we find in the law under that creation. Okay, the first one is a feature that allows for the identification, segregation, and reservation of certain lands as people's small-scale mining areas. Okay, so this is a new development, at least under this law, and this is exactly what makes it so. Any areas that are designated as people's small-scale mining areas, or minahang bayan is the other term that they use, actually was started under the implementing rules and regulation. It created that definition or that nomenclature for this people's small-scale mining areas. Okay, so this is how you're able to ensure that the small-scale miners are authorized to do their small-scale mining. They're basically, this designation gives them their area where they can do that, where they can exercise their craft, so to speak. Okay, so this law provides for that. Okay, it also created. This is a relatively new development. Well, new in the sense that it was made possible through this law when this law was put into effect. it made it so the local government has an entity that can serve as a mining regulatory board. Okay, so the law allowed for the creation of two types of those mining regulatory boards, a provincial as well as a city. Okay, so again, that's a new development under this law. So now let's take a look at what other features there are. Okay, it allowed for the strengthening of extension of government technical and financial assistance to small-scale miners. So this is a lot like what we talked about moments ago, the technical and financial assistance agreement. So it all, there is a similar type of a program for small scale miners. So this financial and technical and financial assistance is kind of an interesting thing because it's not exactly going back to the features of the Philippine Mining Act. It's not the same as the mining agreements that are defined there, because the mining agreements are basically for the full mining operations, and there's usually a I didn't get a chance to discuss this later, earlier, so I guess I'll discuss it now. The mining agreements, depending on the types, there's three types. Okay, provides for what contributions each party will have. Okay, so one party, of course, is the government, the DNR or MGD in this case, and then the other party is the contractor. Okay, and that could be a foreign national or a foreign corporation. Okay, so depending on the type, they pretty much have some contributions, whether it's their effort, the work that they do, or whatnot. So there's kind of a split as to how that will be divvied up. Okay, in financial and technical assistance agreements, basically, since it has financial, the contractor is actually able to put money into the effort. Okay, it's how that entity is able to put money into the effort, and that again is the reason why it got challenged eventually in the Supreme Court, because there was a question that by putting money in, you're taking ownership of these resources that belong to the state. Okay, so that was the challenge. That's that Labugal case, Labugal case, Supreme Court case. So anyway, that's the difference between the FTA, or the Financial or Technical Assistance Agreement, and mining agreements. So anyway, going back to where we're at here. Here in small-scale mining, there is a counterpart to the FTAA. That's what this is here. The strengthening of the extension of government technical and financial assistance to small-scale miners. This one is not the actual contractor, but it alludes to the assistance that would be provided by the government to small-scale miners. Okay, so I just went off on a tangent because I didn't get a chance to describe earlier when we were talking about the Philippine Mining Act, on the mining agreement and the FTAA. So that was sort of off on a tangent. So anyway, for this one, it's the government that is actually providing the technical and financial assistance to small-scale miners, and not the other way around. All right. So let's move on. Okay, generation of ancillary livelihood in small-scale mining areas. Okay, so when we say ancillary, it's parang pandagdag, parang sideline almost. It's probably the closest, characterization in Tagalog. It's pandagdag. It's ancillary. It's not the primary source of livelihood. It's ancillary, parang sideline. Okay, so this law provides for that, which is a great thing. Okay, let's move on. It gives priorities to cultural minorities in the exploration, development, and utilization of mineral resources within their ancestral land. So this is similar to the recognition on the Philippine Mining Act, the recognition to the indigenous people and their ancestral lands or cultural communities. Okay, it's similar to that. The one that we discussed earlier is the recognition of those rights. This one is a little bit more than that. Well, it's really the priority that's being given to them. Okay, so they're given the parang first dibs, yung sila yung sa una sa pilahan, to give them the parang first right of refusal ba? I don't know if you know that term in sales, but bago lahat, sila muna yung pagbibigyan natin, kumbaga, yan ang sinasabi dyan. We'll give those IPs, those indigenous people and the cultural communities the first priority to conduct exploration, development, and utilization of mineral resources within their ancestral lands. It's not a general statement. It's only as it applies to their ancestral lands. Okay? Okay, so now we move on to the sanctions. Again, we're talking about two laws here, so we'll look at the sanctions for both. Let's start with the Philippine Mining Act. Let's take a look and see what is enumerated in the law in terms of what the penal provisions are. Okay, there is a provision on false statements, on illegal exploration, theft of minerals, destruction of mining structures, mines arson, willful damage to a mine, illegal obstruction to permittees or contractors, violation of the terms and conditions of the environmental compliance certificate, illegal obstruction to government officials, and the last one is other violations. So this is the enumeration. Some of the provisions, or at least the way they're presented, they're self-explanatory. There's clearly some that probably needs to be scrutinized. Kailangan tignan yung actual definition. Okay, and of course, what we are gonna aim to do on this is what we've been doing in the last number of laws, and that's to look at the definition and to try and find the elements of the offense, so that we have a better understanding of when a violation of this provision is actually present. All right, so we're gonna do that exercise. I have my handy dandy worksheet again, that little table that I came up with, and there's 11 cases here, and I'm just probably gonna do 2 or 3, and then I'll leave the rest to you on your spare time to go ahead and do this on your own. Okay. Again, the only resource that you need is the law itself. Since we're looking at the Philippine Mining Act, and that's the law that you want to look at, RA 7942, and you just need to go to that section that refers to the penal provision. Okay, penal provision. All right, so let's begin. Let's do our exercise. Let's start with the first one. I just did this in a sequence. Ako lang yung number 1, 2, and I think I did number 3. So let's take a look at that now. Let's take a look at false states. Okay, so here's the definition of that offense. The definition, as well as the penal sanctions, the penalties that are provided for it. Let's take a look at it, and from here, like we did the last ones, we should be able to get the elements. Again, we're needing to answer 3 questions here, diba? The first question that we need to ask is, who is the possible offender? Who did the act, the alleged act? Okay. Second question, of course, is, what was the act that was done? And if that act is not obvious, it's not obvious that it's a crime, then the third question is, what makes it a crime? What particular qualifier, what particular circumstance or act qualified it as a crime? So there you have it. Those are the 3 questions. So looking at this one, we should be able to get those answers. Okay, so this first one is fairly easy. I'm not going to do any kind of markings here. I'll just pull up my table and already pre-fill in the answers to the 3 questions, at least, the elements. So at least, now we know the elements here. And the elements are representative of the answers to the 3 questions that we mentioned. Okay, so let's read it. Any person who knowingly presents any false application, declaration, or evidence to the government, or publishes or causes to be published any prospectus or other information containing any false statement relating to mines, mining operations, or mineral agreements, financial or technical assistance agreements, and permits, okay, shall be punished. So that's pretty much it. There's actually that's 2 acts. There's 2 circumstances. So mali ko dito. I should have done two worksheets. Okay, the 2 acts really is the first one is knowingly presents any false application, declaration, or evidence to the government. Okay, that's the first one. And then the second one is publishes or causes to be published any prospectus or other information containing any false statement relating to mines, mining operations, or mineral agreements. Okay, financial or technical assistance agreements and permits. So yun, there should really be two acts here, which means I should have done two worksheets. Okay, so that's my error there. Okay, so I hope you caught that also. Kasi I didn't catch this. When I did this, I just did it quickly and I missed it myself. So we're susceptible to that. So I guess we just have to be cautious. All right, so let's move on. Let's take a look at the second one that I did. The second one is illegal exploration, and the way it's described in the law. Look, this looks very, very easy, really. Kasi isang sentence lang siya. Any person undertaking exploration work without the necessary exploration permit shall, upon conviction, be penalized by blah 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 blah. Okay, so this looks like it's got all 3 of the elements that we're looking for: the offender, which is any person; the act of undertaking exploration work; and the qualifier is without the necessary exploration permit. Okay, there you have it. So it's any person undertaking exploration work. Medyo may typo ako sa sa table ko. There should be on the act or emission, it should just say undertaking exploration work. Okay, I'm missing a number of things now. Maybe it's just a little too late for me or something. But anyway, let's move on to the third one. Okay, this third one is a bit of a challenge. So medyo kailangan natin usisahin to. Mahaba-haba siya. And I know maybe you'll see it, but there are 3 circumstances here that make it so it's necessary to do 3 worksheets. Okay, the first 2 circumstances have the same offender. That's any person, and then the other one is not any person, but specifically the president and each of the directors in cases of associations, partnerships, or corporations. Okay, so those 3 circumstances have 3 different acts, unique acts are being punished. Okay, or at least that qualifies it as a crime. The first one is extracting minerals and disposing the same. Okay, that's the first act. That has a qualifier. The qualifier is that act was done without a mining agreement, lease, permit, license, or license. Okay, so that's the qualifier to the first circumstance. The next circumstance, the act for that circumstance, is any person who steals minerals or ores or the products thereof from mines or mills or processing plants. Okay, no qualifier. Okay, and then the third circumstance is in the bottom, where it's actually the last sentence. It says, in the case of associations, partnerships, or corporations, the president and each of the directors thereof shall be responsible for the acts committed by such association, corporations, or partnership. So basically, that what's that saying is that yung acts on the first circumstance, if those two acts were committed by the association, corporation, or partnership, they are liable. The president and the directors are liable, okay, as if they're the ones that did it. All right. So let's take a look at how they appear on the worksheet. Okay. This is the first circumstance. Any person extracting minerals and disposing the same. It's got a qualifier: without a mining agreement, lease, permit, license. Let's take a look at now the second circumstance. What did I do with my second one? This is the third one, actually. So this third one makes it so the president and each of the directors are the offender. They would be classified as the offender. Okay, and they are only liable in the case of association, partnership, or corporations, of which they are the president and the directors of. The act here is that of extracting, basically the two circumstances, which is the extracting minerals and disposing the same as the first act, and then the second is steals minerals or ores or the products thereof from mines or mills, blah 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 blah. The qualifier is without a mining agreement, lease, permit, license, and that of course is as it pertains to the first circumstance of extracting minerals and disposing the same. Okay, so that's that. Let's see. I don't know if I have the third circumstance here. I may have missed it, but anyway, let's take a look. Okay, it doesn't look like I did create a third table for that third circumstance. Okay, so let's just move on. So anyway, for Philippine Mining Act, I have back on the screen the enumeration of the 10 acts that it considers to be criminal. And I've done basically an exercise to determine what the elements are for at least 2, and maybe, well, 2.5, I guess we'll just call it 2.5, of the 10 offenses that are listed here. Okay, so anyway, the exercise that I did is no different from what I have been doing in the other laws. And the way the laws are defined here, or at least the provisions of these offenses, the way they're defined, is not that different from the ones that we've done in the past. So you should be able to actually conduct that exercise on your own easily, considering that we've done this multiple times already. So being that that's the case, may I suggest on your spare time that you look at the other laws or the other provisions that I did not do that exercise with, and to try and do it on your own, to try and determine if what the elements are of the offense. Okay, do as much as you can para practice lang, so you mahasa, kumbaga, you have a way to sort of sharpen your skills. Okay, because this is a skill. All right. So give that a try, and hopefully that will help you become sort of skilled, even more skilled in this area. Okay, so anyway, let's move forward. What we've done here basically is we've covered the sanctions for the Philippine Mining Act. The last thing we need to do now is we need to do the same thing for the small scale mining. Excuse me, the small scale mining act. So let's go there right now. Okay. Now, what is interesting in the People's Small Scale Mining Act, there is only one provision that talks about sanctions, or there's only one penal provision, and it looks like this. It says violations of the provisions of this act or of the rules and regulations issued pursuant hereto shall be penalized with imprisonment, blah 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 blah. Okay, so what this is saying basically is that any of the provisions of this law, okay, any provision that talks about a particular activity that it sets limits for, it sets parameters, it sets condition, okay. If a person who is attempting to do that activity but goes beyond those limits, those conditions, that person would essentially be in violation and is subject to penal sanctions under Section 27. Okay, I hope that's making sense. But if not, let's do a quick exercise. Okay, so what I did basically is I just quickly browsed through this law and just picked a provision that I thought might be a good example that we could use here. And so I took that, and that's what we're going to use. Let me go ahead and present that on the screen. That's a provision under Section 8, which talks about registration of small-scale miners. Okay, so what it says is that all persons undertaking small-scale mining activities shall register as miners with the board. Okay, the key there is shall. It doesn't say may, okay, but shall. So mandatory siya. It's mandatory that they must register as miners with the board if they are to undertake small-scale mining activities. So that already tells us the elements of how this offense could be a crime, right? Number one, it's also answering the first question of who did it, or who the offender might be. And then, of course, the second question of what the act or omission is also evident by reading that sentence. And then there's even a qualifier. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and put up the table up on the screen, and let's see exactly how I thought it should be broken out. How these elements should be broken out. Excuse me. All right. So first things first. Okay. Section 8 refers to all persons. Okay, so it's kind of a general statement that's addressed to everyone. Okay, but in terms of charging someone, it wouldn't make sense to charge all. All right, it has to be any of the persons in the population. So it can't be all persons, but any. Okay, and not just any, but any person who is undertaking small-scale mining activities. Okay, and it's not just any person who undertakes small-scale mining activities. It has to be one who did not register, without having registered as a miner with a board. So, general rule is that for them to undertake small-scale mining, okay, they must be registered, right? So anyway, you'll see it there that I made the need to register first a qualifier. Okay, so that's kind of how I laid it out. And anyway, so I hope that makes sense. So for the other other provisions, you probably maybe this is an exercise you can do on your own. You want to look at the other provisions of the People Small Scale Mining and see if in those provisions it's setting some conditions, some parameters, some limits as to a particular activity. And when you see that it does, then that could be a subject of possible violation of this law. And then you could do this thing where you determine what the elements are, so you can be certain when you're thinking that a particular person who's doing a particular act is in violation. Okay. All right. So unfortunately, this is the only one I did, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate another case. Okay. I guess just the one other thing I want to mention here, going back to Section 27, the reference is not just on this law, not just the People Small Scale Mining Act, or RA 7076, but any provisions of the implementing rules and regulation of this law. Okay, again, it reads violations of the provision of this act, this law, the People Small Scale Mining Act, or of the rules and regulations issued pursuant hereto. So anything that is in pursuant to the People's Small Scale Mining Act. So, for example, the implementing rules and regulation, kasi many times that'll provide some limits also. So that could be the basis of a possible violation. So you're not going to want to limit your search for possible violations or possible provisions that could be violated. You don't want to just limit it to this law, this RA 7076. You also want to look at there are other rules and regulations, the IRR, for example, that were issued pursuant to this law. Okay? So I think that's that. It's time to close it off. We've pretty much done everything I think we need to do for these two laws, these two mining laws, and we're pretty much done. So this is the end of lesson 3. I hope you learned something from these last 45 minutes or an hour. I don't know how long I've been talking, but throughout the duration of this lesson, I hope you were able to pick up a number of things that will help you. Anyway, having said that, I'm also hopeful that at some point we'll have an opportunity to interact so that we could ask each other questions and share more information. So pretty much I'm looking forward to that. And that said, we are now at the end, as I said, of lesson 3. We are about ready to proceed to lesson 4. So for now, let me bid you adieu, and we'll see you again in lesson number 4. Until then, bye-bye.